Okay. I wish I have some background music though. Like I need to find a way to have some special sound effects and to be almost like a radio host. Okay, cool. Perfect. So, people, beautiful people, we are here to talk about the important subject for all of us in this lonely career, this isolated career that everyone knows that being in front of the computer 8 hours a day, we have two options. Or we're getting more crazy, or we're getting more crazy. So we have two options here, and we need to just understand that these times and this being in the community is super important. And we have a special guest, a Blender artist, website designer, and also a mentor for a platform. It's called adplist.org. So he know what he's talking about, and I will introduce Lee Smalt, and he's going to talk about imposter syndrome. First, what it is. He's also going to tell us his story, and of course, understand why is this important and how to overcome this. That is a subtle thing that happened to all of us, and we didn't realize sometimes that we have it. So, no more talk to this bold guy, and I will give Lee Smalt a shout out. So put everyone emojis to give him, the energy he needs. So Lee, go for it. Or you're muted.
Oh.
No worries. So we'll do it again. So with no more further ado, that's how we say it, right? You will find Lee Smalt here, Blender artist, website designer.
There we go.
And yeah, I think we're done. So welcome Lee. Go for it.
Thank you, Pedro. You guys can hear me now?
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. Well, I appreciate the introduction, Pedro. Yeah, my name is Lee Smalt. I've been working in marketing and creative services for just over 10 years. I started out with a brewery in Fargo, North Dakota. My last in-house position was with a U.S.-based national renewables contractor. So we built, wind and solar farms all over the country that, powered cities. I built their video production department when I was there. And about a year and a half ago, I left to go freelance. It's actually the third time in my life that I've gone freelance. I've done graphic design. I've done real estate photography. I've done 3D animation. I've done drone work. The whole kind of scope of creative services. And we're talking about imposter syndrome today, and I'm very familiar with this. So my degree is actually in cultural anthropology. I don't have a degree in any kind of creative services or marketing. I am entirely self-taught. So when I was in college, I took a handful of marketing classes, but no degree. And when I was also finishing up my degree, I took a handful of typography classes, but nothing in-depth as far as graphic design. So I've long sort of struggled with imposter syndrome and how to handle it. And about 4 years ago, I joined adplist.org, as Pedro mentioned. I joined as a mentee, actually. I was looking to connect with creative directors and senior leadership in the creative space, just trying to figure out how I move from being this contributor, because it's just as an individual contributor, you don't have a lot of say in how things are processed, how things go. And I felt really insecure about what I was doing with my life and where my career was going. And I was fortunate enough to meet a number of mentors through that platform who looked through the work that I did, who had conversations with me, and basically just kind of laid it to me straight. They're like, look, sure, you could increase your portfolio quality a little bit. You could, increase your branding online a little bit more and just be this really polished look. But honestly, you've already got the skills and you've already got the mindset that most creative leaders have. So if you're being held back, that's actually at your company level. That's not necessarily you. So they really encouraged me to sort of find ways to just feel really comfortable with myself and what I'm doing, and sort of build a stronger network of supportive people, which really helped. And since then, I've just been doing this. I've been connecting with creatives all over the world, just trying to help them feel like the work they do matters, because it's really hard to feel like what you do has any value, not just because organizations don't really give us recognition, but also because the work we do is really fleeting. We might spend weeks and weeks on a video and it goes up and you're like, yay, that's it. There's no congratulations, there's no award ceremony, there's no like longevity. You might get a pat on the back or congratulations email, but for the most part, the stuff that we do doesn't really get a lot of recognition. And so it's really difficult to kind of stay in that moment of feeling good about the work that you've done. So as I mentioned, I'm part of ADP List. About a year and a half, 2 years ago, I switched over to mentoring myself through adplist.org. And then I also joined a local community called Nice Moves Minnesota. I'm based in Minnesota, USA. And we have a professional development network specifically for motion designers that meet in person and online. And then I'm also the chair of their mentorship committee. So I organize their whole mentorship program. So when it comes to imposter syndrome, it really comes from a couple of different places. One, no matter what organization you work with, there's not a lot of education around the value around marketing and creative services. And so leadership teams tend to just sort of like treat it as just a random service they need, like they hold higher value for sales. As a matter of fact, if you're looking to boost your work recognition while you're inside an organization, you should get really comfortable with the sales team or the business development team, because they will drive all of the business decisions and it'll help you make better choices as a marketer or as a creative person. So, but imposter syndrome is this sort of like impending feeling of insecurity about the work that you're doing and about whether or not it really has impact. And I'm going to tell you right now, it does. Kevin Rapp, who you'll probably see on LinkedIn, he focuses a lot on sort of boosting the metrics around creative services. And every time he puts out any kind of solid numbers, it's like, holy cow, like creative services has a huge impact. And because it's at the very top of the sales funnel, it kind of gets forgotten because we always forget sort of the last thing that happens. And that's the sales, that's the conversion side. So that's why they get all of the love. So there are essentially three tools that I use when it comes to combating imposter syndrome. The first one is perception. And this is probably the most challenging one to work with. And there's sort of three sub-steps within perception. So first is kind of giving yourself permission to be messy. The creative process in of itself is very messy. And we're all kind of on our own journey. And so some people started doing creative services right out of high school or right out of college. And so they've had all this experience. And some people are really passionate about it and have a lot more time to dedicate it. And so when you give yourself permission to be messy and give people kind of a peek behind the curtain behind what that messiness is, posting your behind the scenes footage, posting your models that don't look the best, that don't have great topology, putting out, animatics, some of the pre-planning work, all of those things kind of help people see like there's this process to this, and that process it's not clean, as much as we want to see that beautiful final render, like it's just as important to tell the story of that render as it is to show the final piece, because by giving yourself to be messy, you allow yourself that freedom to just be comfortable with not having the perfect output. And then when you recognize that everybody's sort of at a different point in their journey, that kind of also gives you permission to be messy. It's kind of this dual process of like looking at these two different ways of viewing your work and viewing everybody else's work, because we know that comparison is the thief of joy. We go out there and we see people who've been working in the industry for decades, and you're like, oh my God, that work is amazing. Why isn't mine better? And it's like, well, that quality is a subjective consideration. And what somebody puts out in the public view for consumption may not necessarily be the work they're getting paid for. For example, 90% of the work I get paid for does not show up on the internet. A lot of times it's under NDAs, but the other thing is that it's not sexy. It's just work. Because like the thing is, unsexy projects pay the bills. But that's fine.
That's a good line, though. That's a really good line. Yeah. That's a really good. That's a bar. That's a bar itself.
But it's true. I mean, there's a lot of work out there that's just work, and that's fine. Like that helps you. It helps them. As long as you're being a good partner in that relationship, then that's okay. And then the last part of the perception piece that I do is I try to reframe that comparison part. When we're looking online and we see all of this beautiful work, instead of thinking about it internally and being like, oh, how could I be better? How do I get to that? Their work is so good. Just celebrate them for doing awesome. Just be like, hey, you should be proud of this work. And by like not focusing on what it means about you and focusing on just celebrating somebody else, that really helps you stop worrying so much about where you're at on your journey. And it helps you feel like, of course they had a really messy process to get to where they're at, and they just didn't show everything, or even if they did show it, I didn't see it because of the algorithm and how things show up in your timeline. So that's the perception piece, and that's probably the most impactful. I'm probably, in fighting imposter syndrome, it's probably the most challenging too, is just kind of like recognizing when you're getting into these problematic mindsets of like, oh, it's got to be perfect work, or oh, why am I not at that level yet, or oh, they're so much better than me, and just turning all of those things on their head and being like, nah, they're doing great work because they put in the work to get there. They should be celebrated for that, So yeah. And then the other two things that I do are much more, they're not as like mindset focused, they're like tactical things. So one of the things that I do is I take inventory, and that's, kind of a generalized way to explain it. But I started this when I was doing work when I was working in-house, because we always do these like performance reviews. It doesn't matter what organization you're in. They have this annual process to be like, hey, what'd you do? Let's validate the work you did, which can be kind of demoralizing. But I have found that I've brought that same practice into my freelancing life, not because I'm turning in my work to my boss. I am my own boss. But by going through about once a quarter is when I do it. Sometimes I do it when I'm feeling a little more insecure than others. I'll go through and I'll basically identify every project that I did in that time frame. And then each project, I'll list all of the different pieces of that. Did I do storyboarding in there? Did I do script writing? Did I, do animation? Did I do modeling? Like, what are all of the different skills that went into that? And then what all skills went into that skills? Because storyboarding is a whole other set of skills that I had to develop. It wasn't just like, do I know how to draw? I had to learn what branding was and what audience influences and what emotional triggers are, and kind of like this whole range of skill sets that fit into other smaller skill sets. And by writing all of this stuff out, it can be in text or you can write it on a piece of paper, whatever. It helps you kind of look back and be like, oh my God, I did so much work. I did so much work that I was doing work all the time and I didn't even think about it. And now looking at all that, I'm like, holy cow, I should be proud of this. I should be proud of how much effort I did to do something that didn't really get a lot of recognition, because it's more about process than it is about product in the end.
Great.
Excuse me. The last thing is what we're doing here. It's building community. Your community will save you from yourself. I see it over and over again.
That's another bar. That's another bar.
Yeah, thank you. It's I belong to the Nice Moves community, the ADP list community. I'm also very active on LinkedIn, and I'm building sort of a separate community of motion designers and sort of senior creatives, not just people in 3D and animation, or people in product development or website development, but creative directors, artistic directors, illustrators, just this very large group of people who have a very similar mindset of like, we just like to create things, like, and we don't want to deal with the weird politics that come with working in a corporate setting. Now, some people definitely work in corporate settings, and that's fine. But more so, like, it's that mindset of like, we're all going to support each other. Either it's a Blender community or it's a motion design community. But by being active and engaged in these places and like chatting with people, it does so much to help you feel better about the work you're doing, because you get to see where everybody is in their progress. So
that's wonderful. That's wonderful. So if you think about it, then the steps first, if I'm hearing correctly, the first step is just recognize that you have this. So the first step is just understand your thoughts, right? And realize what type of thoughts that I'm getting when I see something, right? Specifically when I see competitions, right? When I see other work, what thoughts are come to my mind. And that's right. The step one is just realize that we have these thoughts, correct?
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, it's hard to counter something or reframe something if you don't recognize that that's what's happening,
And also the weird thing is, like, we see these amazing pieces and we know that with a little effort we can do it, these big studios ones. But when we go to Behance or we go to the back, the breakdowns of how many people work on that piece, it's like there's 10 people working on this. So you can imagine, like, probably a team of 10 people will be better than one, probably. Right? So when we also didn't realize that we are comparing ourselves with a utopia sometimes, with an existing model. It's almost like these teenage girls that they compare with this stereotypic beauty in that is fake, right? And they compare themselves to that, and they will never be satisfied, because they're comparing to something that does not exist. And sometimes we compare with things that are on the same path and the same perspective, like, because one guy, it's super hard that just one guy, it's possible, but it's super hard, that can do the same work that a team of 20 people that are working years on this, right? What's your take on that?
Well, the other piece of that, you're absolutely right, that like, if you go on the back end of some of these really, really high-end projects and you see, the whole huge team of people that are involved, that project might have taken 10 weeks, and there was 7-8 people on it. One person's completely dedicated to the illustration style, one person's totally dedicated to project management, whatever. The other thing that you don't see on that behind the scenes is like how challenging that project may have been. You don't know whether there was miscommunication. You don't know if there was people who fought. You don't know if somebody left the company because they're like, this project was the one that just like did it for me, and they're like, I can't do this anymore. This creative director is overbearing. They don't communicate well. You don't know any of those pieces behind the scenes. And so we tend to assume that, it went really well because the project looks beautiful at the end. And then if you can go look online and find all sorts of behind the scenes footage of like old Disney animations, of old Pixar animations. You can go see the marketing campaigns. Like, there's a video out there. It'll take me a while to find it, but it's all about how the movie Treasure Planet was completely sabotaged by the marketing team and the leadership team at Disney, even though it's like cutting edge. Like, it was in line with Tarzan when it came out, when they were doing the hybrid 2D 3D workflows, but Disney for some reason just decided they didn't want to do it. And it's like, you didn't get that when you watched the movie. You didn't see any of those things. You're just like, this is a cool story and they animated it really well and look at all this beautiful stuff. Well, it turns out that movie cost them very high level animators because there was so much conflict going on in the background. So just, the more supportive we are of ourselves and of each other, the less room there is for some of that toxic pieces of the industry to kind of seep in, because it's not just there's not just toxicity from like oh, I'm insecure and like in that perspective, but there's also toxic positivity out there where people are like, it's gonna be amazing no matter what, and you're like, we got to be real about things too, like it's a little more than just straightforward.
You're floating in the air, mister. You're floating in the air. So I remember that one guy that was a Houdini guy. I don't know if you guys know him, but it's called Simon Holmedal. And actually put the website here. And he is like, he always search like for, he always show us the pieces that the project rejects. And I love that because he show like finishing pieces that really look really good, but the client doesn't choose. And sometimes we didn't think about, most of the time we just think about from our perspective, and that also create a different outcome with the same input. What I mean is, if a client decide to choose something that we are doing, it's not because we're doing it wrong. It's because we are basically not aligned with the vision that the client has in terms of business. And sometimes that frustration make us believe that we are not good enough. And I think posting things are being rejected, or like, as you said, like things are in the so and at the same time posting things that didn't work or didn't make the project through, or how many storyboard you did, or how awful your storyboard are, or how better you are getting there, it also helps. So if you can summarize, for example, like, I don't know, it's a hard question, but if you can summarize like steps that someone needs to do to first realize that he has this, when they have this problem, and then how to overcome it, how you say we can do that?
Well, I think first steps, like you mentioned before, is just sort of recognizing, like, if you feel bad about the work that you're doing, that's a really good time to sort of analyze what you're thinking about and what you're feeling and what you're, if you feel defeated, that's something to start exploring. If you're feeling burnt out, as they say, that's something to explore too. Start just recognizing that piece, and then immediately start looking about ways that you can counter it, but in like, not just counter it for the sake of countering it, but countering it in a way that supports your actual needs. And, make sure that you're being supportive of yourself and supportive of others. Because it's really easy to just start hating on people as well as part of your reaction. And we don't need to do that either. There's plenty of work out there, and we're all on different parts of our journey. So that's sort of the first step, is like that recognizing piece, and then starting to reframe your perception around it and trying to see like, well, what is it that I need to explore about myself and my own thoughts to improve this situation. And then, like I said, taking inventory, making sure that you're taking note of all of the work that you do, if only for yourself.
That's step two. Step two is taking inventory. Okay.
Step two would be take inventory for sure. Like, and I'm going to be honest, like, these are steps, but I switch them in and out as the situation calls for it. Like, sometimes I use all of them, sometimes I just use one of them, sometimes I just don't have time to write down all the things that I did. So but developing community would technically be step 3, but that's an ongoing process. Like, we should all be building community all the time. It's in everyone's best interest to be connecting with one another, learning from one another, providing resources for one another. You never know what somebody was exposed to, what they weren't exposed to, and what could ultimately be the piece of education that changes their whole career around. So,
right. I was wondering, like, because I was hopefully the goal here, the motivation to create this space basically is to tell people that you can make a good living with 3D, with creativity, and this is possible. I did it. I know a lot of people that do it, and there's a lot of people that also believe that it's not possible, and something is because of this type of thoughts. Something is because they think they're not good enough, and that's also something that is really deep into your mind. There's a good there's a woman that is a really great psychologist, and she says like every thought is a seed, and if you water that seed will grow as a tree. And when the tree is too big, you only see the fruit of that, and the fruit are bad emotions like envy, anxiety, and things like that. And you didn't realize that those emotions are reflections or fruits of a bigger tree that born from a seed. And most of the time, those seeds are being planted without you realize it, and for all the people that surround you. So if someone says to you, you're not doing enough when you're a kid, or your dad or your mom was too hard, or whatever the situation was, an authority figure will plant those seeds inside of you, and you start watering them because you didn't realize, and you start following that pattern. So what do you think would be an advice for someone that don't know with this thought came? What do you think will be a good exercise, or what do you think will be a good practice to try to overcome this?
Well, I'm of the mind that you can always change everything around. That like humans are pretty fluid in their ability to switch perception and switch identities. It really comes down to reinforcement of whatever specific mindset they're in. So it might be, an envious mindset, it might be an insecure mindset, but that can be fleeting. You don't need to hold on to feelings. You definitely should feel them, but you don't need to like continue to nurture things that aren't serving you.
Right.
And so I want to actually segue real quick into Alan's question here. In the chat here. So imposter syndrome is feeling useful and feeling that your work is in demand. And so it's really focused around like whether or not you are, finding work. And I got to be honest, like finding work is probably one of the biggest challenges any freelancer has.
Any company has.
Yeah, and like this is for everybody. This is not just you as a freelancer. I worked for a $1 billion corporation that built renewable contracts all over the country. It took us sometimes up to 2 years to ink contracts. Like it is work to find work. And matter of fact, most of the time when new freelancers come to me and they're like, "Hey, can you give me advice?" My immediate reaction is like, the work is not the work. I live by the 80-20 rule. My job is 80% finding work and 20% executing it, because I do not want to just churn and burn projects. It drives me nuts. That was part of what built my burnout, was like at one point as a single video producer, I was producing over 60 videos a year for a corporation. Wow. And it's like, that was account management, that was the production process, that was pre-production, that was post, whole 9 yards. And it's like, it's so much. And like in the end, it contributes to the imposter syndrome of feeling like you're not really contributing, you're just pushing content. And so when one of the things that I try to impress upon people is that we as creatives have a much, much higher standard for what our output looks like than what clients do. And because of that, finding work is not just posting content online. Like, yes, absolutely, you should have a passive lead generation process that's helpful. Emails, social media, whatever process you want to do for trying to find inbound sales. However, the most effective way to get work is twofold. One is building community. I tell people all the time, like, I get 10 times better qualified leads out of the Discord channels that I'm just hanging out and chatting in than I do out of like Contra, or there's a motion design platform called Rolo that Joey Corman built.
I was invited on that.
Yeah. They're just, clients aren't there looking for people. That's one of them. But the other thing is like being a good partner. So as you're building relationships with clients and asking for referrals, if you kind of put your own stuff aside and like really be present with clients and find out what they're responding to, not just like, "Hey, thanks for making this thing," but if they're like, okay, so this last client I just had, we had one storyboard session and they were like emailing me over and over again about how wonderful the process was. And I'm like, we're in step one here. Like, we haven't even gotten
There's
to
a
the
long
video
way
yet.
to go, man. There's a
I haven't
long way
even
to
given
go.
you style frames. Like, we have just started. And what they were stoked about was just like how much attention to detail I had over the planning process. Because people buy process more than they buy a product.
Right.
And so as a freelancer, if you can foster those partnerships and relationships with people, that will help you combat your imposter syndrome, because these people are going to provide you some of that external reinforcement around the work that you do. Because I got to tell you, that video I gave to those people that were just through the roof and kept sending me emails about how wonderful everything was, it was not a sexy project. That thing is not going on any of my reels because it's for essentially a toilet paper company. It's a little more nuanced than that, but it's not a sexy project. But it paid really well.
Until we're in a pandemic.
Yeah, right. But yeah, they that relationship of like being very communicative, being, you know, not assuming anything. So like I would be educational in that process. And now that client is going to refer me to other clients and to other departments within their own work. And then additionally, that client was technically working for somebody else. So their client was also very floored with the work. And so like by fostering that relationship, instead of just like hyper fixating on what I'm delivering and like focusing more on the process, like that helped me feel so much better about this work that was essentially very boring. Like it wasn't very exciting at all, but it's you know, the process is what made it fun, not the product. So
so I think it's super important what you said, and you know, and answering also your Alan question, I think imposter syndrome is not directly related to prospecting, but it is negotiating, because when you don't understand the value that you have in the chain of a product, you will undervalue your service. Your own product will be undervalued right away if you think it's not value enough. Because sometimes, you know, we try to think that it's hard to disconnect ourselves from our work. That is a totally recommendable thing. Like, you need to disconnect yourself, your identity for what you do, so that your outcome is not where you are, right? So separate things, but sometimes it's hard to do that. And when you don't understand how important is your role inside a business, if you think that you're not important, right? That is almost this mindset. You'll undervalue what you do, and it will not affect getting clients, but it will affect selling projects, making it sell. Because I just talked to a client that is creating pieces for minery. So they sold pieces for 400K a product, between 20K and 400K. Okay. And I asked him, because I asked my client questions and a lot. And I asked him, like, what is this piece contribute on the sales process? Like a specific, what percentage it contributes? And he said to me, it's like between 5 and 10%. So without doing anything, the 3D piece, the 3D animations that we create for them, it contributes between 5 and 10%. So they probably sold about 100K, or 100 units per year. So that's almost like, I don't know, $40 million, you can call it away, or let's say 10 million, right? If our contribution is 5 to 10%, the piece that we did for them is how much, right? 10% for 10 million is $1 million, right? So like, and they are happy to pay that. I didn't charge that, unfortunately, but but they're happy to pay if they 10x that amount. So let's say that piece is just 1% responsible. It's still this 100K piece. So I'm just saying this because to realize that our job here is to build sales vehicles. And a sales team without a good vehicle is not that effective. So, and I'm just saying, I'm just reframing this to understand the importance of what we do. I don't know if that answered your question, Alan. Okay.
Totally.
Okay, cool. So anyone has question for Lee? And Lee, man, thank you. This has been wonderful, man. I appreciate your input here. It's like it's for pure gold.
Oh, thanks for inviting me on.
So yeah, more questions. So you can unmute yourself.
Hi, Lee. Can you hear me?
Yeah,
I can hear you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey. How are you?
Doing well.
Yeah. So I just wanted to ask, can you please elaborate on your process? You were just talking about your client was super happy the way you like walk them through the process for the project. Can you just share more about it, like how we can do the same thing?
Yeah, sure. So I'll talk about this specific client in general. So I was actually in Amsterdam. I was at the Blender conference, and this client actually I got through ADP list. They were a mentor of mine. They are SVP at a tech research company, which isn't typically the world that I work within, but they were familiar with some of the work that I had done. I had actually sent them some websites to review because I wanted to kind of get their insight and their expertise about my design, because I don't have a UX background, and that's like their whole industry. And they were very kind about that feedback. But when I was in Amsterdam, they reached out to me and was like, hey, we don't do video production work. We've got a client asking for something. Is this something you can help with? And I was like, yeah, absolutely. Let's start at the beginning though. And I was like, so before I can estimate this project for you, here are a list of 10 questions that I have. If somebody just says, hey, I need a video, or hey, I need a motion design project, because it's like, there's so much information that needs to be embedded in that before I can tell them how much. I don't know how long it is. I don't know what assets I have to build on my own. I don't know what resources they have available. I don't know if they have brand identity.
That's like every client ever, they'll be like, how much do you charge? Without giving any information. Yeah.
So basically, when you ask questions, they feel more value, correct?
Yep. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. My client, she wasn't my client at the time, but she eventually became mine. When I sent her that list of like, hey, I need these 10 questions answered before, that right away set the tone for our relationship, and she was stoked. She was like, this helps me go to my client and be like, hey, I have all of these questions to ask. And so we arranged a meeting. She had another meeting with her client, essentially a discovery call with them, armed with the questions I had, of course, her own. She came back to me. She didn't have all of my questions answered, but she had them asked, which is kind of a step in the right direction. So we got our scope nailed down. We got, a good idea of what they had available, what their timelines look like. We had to negotiate on the compensation, not so much that like they were trying to talk me down, but they have a different process for compensating freelancers than I typically work within. We had to have conversations about how that was going to work, because I wanted to make sure they got a fair deal and I got a fair deal. Once again, just that building the relationship part of it, instead of just jumping in and saying, yep, it's going to cost you, $5,000 for this 30-second video. Like, that's not how I operate. And so the second meeting was with her and her client, and we talked through their needs a little bit. We talked through their brand assets and what they had. I was really fortunate that my client is a fairly large client, and then the people that they hired, or that hired them, is like a multinational organization, so it's huge. So they had all of their brand identity stuff very easily accessible. They even had situations for like imagery and color and typography and animation. Like you almost never see motion design brand guidelines. That doesn't ever really happen. So I was fortunate in that fact. And then hold on one second. And then I was like, okay, I'm gonna start building a storyboard. And so my first story, I use Miro. Is everybody here familiar with Miro? Yeah. So I use Miro. I love the functionality of it. And so I sent them basically this is the infrastructure of the video that you're looking for. You need a roughly 45-second video. It's got to have the brand lockups on either end. Those are going to be about 3 seconds each, which means I've got this many scenes, and each scene has to be this many seconds. And then basically I broke down each scene into what's going to be on screen, what's the sort of emotional trigger, emotional trigger that people were looking to pull from each scene, what kind of language is being used, sort of all of the storyboard elements without any of the visuals. And then we had another meeting and they talked through it all. There was some minor adjustments. They had to go back to one of their marketing people and work asynchronously. And then they came back with feedback. And so I incorporated that all up and I wrote up another storyboard, but started putting style frames within, and just incorporated all of their feedback into that. And then we had one more session with another storyboard and kind of different style frames, and they loved it. But as I'm going through all of these communications,
yes,
as I share my Miro board, I make sure to explain how to function within Miro, because I can't assume that my clients know how to operate it.
Right.
When I ultimately sent them the first rough draft, I sent it with Frame.io, which is an Adobe company that does video sharing and review. I explained to them how to operate in that. So like doing the education on top of doing the actual work really helped them feel comfortable that I was there to support them on top of just provide them with the ask. And so we had kind of a tighter deadline in the project. And in the end, we kind of got to this point where I was like, okay, we got to stop doing storyboards and I got to just put together a rough draft for you. And then I sent them a rough draft, and it, I didn't love it, but I wasn't going to communicate that to them. I was just like, this is where we're at in the process. I'm not sure this is where we need to be. But they had very few feedback about it because we had spent all of this time going through the planning. And that's really what motivated me the most to get into freelancing, is that I know there's a proper way to do work when it comes to creative work. And when I was working in-house, I struggled with getting people to do things the right way. And now as a freelancer, I can basically set that boundary. Like, this is what's happening. This is what we're going to do. I have some flexibility in my process, but if you aren't willing to adhere to what I need to do to make this successful, we are not going to be successful. And so, of course, I don't frame it that way with clients, but when it came down to it, they didn't have any edits. Like, I did my rough draft. They were like, this is in line with where we're supposed to be going. I did a final review where I had all my sound design in there, my music in there, and all my animation, all of my rotoscoping. Right. There was definitely mistakes in the video, but as the creative, you see those more than the client does. But they loved it. And they were like, we're done, you did great. And I was like, oh, well, sweet. It's just really as simple as like asking all of the questions, even questions that you might think are obvious or make a lot of sense. One of the things that we got to remember is that these people have completely different educational backgrounds. They have completely different motivations in what they're doing. And so as long as you can meet them where they're at and meet their goals, you're going to build that relationship, instead of just hyper focusing on what you want to do. So here, I
understand. So it's more about, like making your clients a part of the process and like educating as you go through it.
Right.
Yeah. Here,
like showing them everything behind the scenes.
Yeah. Here, I'll actually show you guys some of my behind the scenes.
Let's do it. So I think I can refill meanwhile. Basically, step one is to ask questions. Dive deep into questions. Questioning are really good because it puts yourself as an expert. When you go to a doctor, the doctor says questions to you all the time, right? They position themselves as an expert because they're asking questions. And then they communicate the process. I mean, the doctor analogy is super powerful because they communicate the entire process before they go to the process. And that makes you feel part of the process. And they don't assume that you know everything. They don't assume that you know nothing. So that's also a good thing to know, right?
Yep. So this is a podcast that I'm producing. I'm producing it all on my own. It's something that I've been interested in for probably close to 10 years. I never wanted to do a podcast, but in having conversations with people, it became clear that people were really into this. This is something they wanted. So
Right.
I have a lot of guests here, and some of these people are much more, well known in the industry than others. Ryan Summers is the artistic director, creative director at Split. Austin Saylor has a massive program. He actually, not last year, but the year before, he ran an online campaign where he basically showed behind the scenes of making $200,000 in a year as a motion design freelancer. Juan Behrens worked for Buck. He was an art director for them. Christine Shelley is an SVP for a tech UX firm. Anyways, in order to get all of these people to agree to this, yes, I absolutely told them my idea, which was this podcast around technical work in the creative fields that's interdisciplinary, not networking, not soft skills, but like, here are technical skills. I showed them this board. I was like, here, take a look at my messy thought process on the back end of this thing. Like, it started with this. What are technical and theoretical tools that creatives use that are interdisciplinary? Color theory, depth of field, proceduralism, animation principles, storytelling techniques. So there's all these like tools that we use as creatives, and then I just built it out from there. Well, now I need episodes. Well, each episode needs to be broken down, and some things are too niche. Like, I'm not gonna do an episode on pivot points because they're pretty obvious what a pivot point is.
Rigging.
Exactly. Like, but on the other hand, sound design, visual effects, easing and speed curves, physically based rendering, like, these are technical skills. And so by bringing in those guests to see what my process looks behind the scene, I got so much more buy-in from people, and so many people that were like, this is how it should be done. This is what we need to do. I need to have context for what it is that we're doing, because by having that context, now I feel comfortable. I feel secure in my contribution to that piece. So
I actually, you think about it, how many of you right now feel more close to Lee's perspective when he showed this? Put your emojis. How many of you feel that way? And it's simple, right? It's like, it's a perfect example. So Samar, do you have a questions, or you have you say it?
Alan, you say no, huh?
Right.
I just wanted to agree with what he was saying. I didn't realize I was raising my hand, but I really appreciate this session, at least suffering more from imposter syndrome, right? I do see the direction, at least, where I think I should be heading after this call. Thanks a lot for that.
That's great. And I think, to close, I think, first of all, thanks, Lee. You are wonderful. I appreciate what you did here. It's been amazing having you on this call. And also, what is your last thought about this typical thinking about, I don't have the portfolio good enough to have good projects? And that's also something that is not too much related with what your internal process is, more about your outcome, the perspective of your outcome. But there's a lot of people think that they don't have the portfolio that it needs to have clients, basically. What's your perspective on that?
My perspective is that it's always great to have great examples of your work, but more important than that is the relationships that you're building. There's a woman named Leanne Brennan who I got into a conversation with years ago, because she doesn't even have a reel. And I'm like, how do you do work all the time if you don't have a reel? I haven't worked on my reel in years, and it's definitely not representative of how good a quality I can produce now. But your reel is really just kind of your foot in the door. If you really want a solid reel, you want to go look at a bunch of other reels and not do what they're doing. Like, I know that sounds sort of counterintuitive, but we were talking to Ryan Summers about a month ago, and he was discussing how he spent 2 weeks reviewing 400 reels for 2 positions. Wow. And in the end, they actually hired 2 people that they already had relationships with. Because all of the work looked the same, like 400 reels, and they all looked like they came out of School of Motion.
Right.
Which, don't get me wrong, technically executed, it looks good, but it doesn't differentiate yourself. You can't. So when it comes to your reel, yes, absolutely put something quality out there, but much, much, much more important than having a good reel, have good relationships with people, right. Build your community up so that people want, because the thing is like marketing tells us people.
Oh, you got freeze.
Apple Watch. You're not buying. You don't buy an Apple Watch because it's got the best functionality. Apple sells a lifestyle, a mindset. Right. And so that's sort of the same thing as a freelancer. It's like you want to build that relationship piece more than, oh, look, I make amazing work, I mean,
if you imagine that analogy, like they know the industry, and if they think that everything is the same, you can imagine a client that they don't know anything about this, and they just see images. And I had this thought today, thinking about even with AI all over the place, they don't know if this is AI generated or is custom made. Like they don't have any clue of what they're seeing, like nope. Even in that perspective. So yeah. So hey, Abhijit, go ahead. Oh, what you mean is we should create our own style to differentiate ourselves in the creative market?
Yeah, you can absolutely differentiate yourself by creating your own style. And that's not to say you need to like niche down and do only one specific thing. But the less that you fade into the general noise of what other creative work is out there, the better you are set. My creative output isn't nearly as good as like Already Been Chewed's work. They do phenomenal work. However, I'm still proud of the work that I do. And I have a slightly different style than, a good portion of the creative work that you'll see out there. That's a bit of a function of how I learned how to do that work. It's also a bit of a function of like, I don't want my stuff to look like School of Motion work. So.
Right. And, I think it's super important also to understand that the only way to differentiate ourselves is through our personal branding, and authenticity is the best way to do it. Oh, yeah. And I because you're a freelance, you have a face. People buy faces. People don't buy brands. So you need to put your face out there. You need to build your personal branding. You need to be vulnerable. You need to post your fails. You need to post your struggles. You need to post like you are a human being with, ups and downs. And that's the only way to create a strong personal brand. If you failed, if you show yourself how you are really, and that will give you an advantage on the saturated world. Because if you put yourself as a personal brand out there and you're really strong and really honest and vulnerable out there, people will connect with you in different levels, not just in the work level, not in the personal level, and you start creating the trust even though they don't know you. And that's a pretty strong weapon to create differentiation in this market.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Cool, man. So Lee, thank you very much. It's been a wonderful time. I will put the Lee LinkedIn right now, so you can just follow him. Let me put the link here. You can follow him LinkedIn. You can reach him for everything you want. Let me put your profile here.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I appreciate everybody taking the time to join us today. Feel free to reach out if you got questions. Highly recommend everybody go check out adplist.org.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Hey guys, Elias said, thank you. You don't know how much value you bring here. We'll post this, of course, in YouTube and all the platforms people cannot be here for a lot of reasons. But I want to thank you in the name of all the community. It's really a pleasure and an honor having you here. We'll be grateful for this for the eternity. God bless you. God bless your family, man. And yeah, so thank you, and see you in the next one.
Thank you. You guys take care.
Okay, guys. Bye bye.